The first clip on the SD card was a doe stepping through mist at 2:11 a.m. The last clip was my girlfriend and me, dead asleep, filmed from outside our bedroom window. It took me a beat to understand what I was looking at. The camera we had strapped to a maple behind the old church, the one 3 miles from our little rental, had somehow captured us inside our house. We put the trail cam up because kids kept sneaking into St. Luke's after dark. The church isn't really a church anymore, just a gray shell with a spine of rafters and pews streaked with bird droppings. It sits on a stone knoll off Hickory Road in Columbia County, Pennsylvania, hemmed by scrub and a small cemetery that long ago lost its fence. The historical society where I volunteer had a stack of complaints, spray paint, toppled headstones, candle wax puddled on the front steps. Jenna and I figured a camera would give us faces, maybe license plates, something we could hand to the one deputy who still cares. We installed it on a Sunday afternoon in October, when the maples were the color of embers and the air smelled like a damp library. I showed Jenna how the infrared turns the world silver at night, how the motion sensor triggers with a fox, a raccoon, a person. We tested it, waving, laughing. She kissed me on the cheek and said, "Let's catch some ghosts." We meant kids and raccoons, of course. We meant the living. For nights later, I swung by after work to swap SD cards. The camera was exactly where I'd left it, tight strap, buckles tucked, a fresh smear of dried sap where my thumb had pressed. Nothing about the sight suggested tampering. Back home, Jenna made tea while I slid the card into my laptop. We leaned in close, the two of us like kids before a campfire, waiting to be spooked by our own joke. The first few clips were what you'd expect. A doe and her fawn drifting out of the trees. A fox slipping like a sentence you almost remember. A pair of teenagers on bikes rolling past the dirt pull-off, their voices swallowed by cricket song. Then, at 2:09 a.m., the frame shuttered. There was the quick blur of a hand, pale and gloveless, reaching toward the lens. The view pitched, went sideways, and for a long beat all we saw were stars, the square of the sky through naked branches, and the edge of the belfry roof. When the image settled again, the angle was wrong. We were low, too low, pointing not at the church but at the ground, the strapped shadow laced across leaves. Someone had taken the camera off the tree. The next clip was the underside of the church steps, scraped pine and a dead ladybug. After that, flat black as the motion sensor rode the dark like a boat without shore. And then, at 3:14 a.m., there we were, our bedroom, framed by the old sash window. Jenna on her side with one knee drawn. Me mouth open, dead to the world. A faint reflection of the camera's own infrared glow trembled in the glass. I sat back so fast the chair squealed. Jenna's hands went to her mouth. We lived 3 miles from St. Luke's, down Hickory and over the creek, then left past the feed mill. Someone lifted our camera off a tree, carried it across roads and yards or in a car, crept through our hosta beds, and filmed us sleeping from 6 feet away. And then, unless this was somehow a terrible glitch, they carried it back and remounted it so neatly that I didn't notice anything amiss. We zoomed in until the pixels fell apart. The chain of paper cranes Jenna strung above the dresser glimmered in the frame. The book with the torn dust jacket on my nightstand. Finn's ears barely visible at the bottom edge where he'd taken up his usual post at the foot of the bed. The timestamp numbers were as plain as the breath fogging the pane, 3 hours 14 minutes and 27 seconds. Our house doesn't have curtains because the street is quiet and the field behind us is corn all summer and empty all winter. Suddenly the quiet felt like an invitation we had stupidly accepted. Jenna wanted reasons. So did I. Maybe Eli from the Historical Society borrowed the camera as a prank. Maybe the deputy had decided to teach us a lesson about minding our own business. Maybe the camera itself had a demo clip I'd never seen. But Eli is 19 and shy, and the deputy barely tolerates us. And there is no demo clip of my girlfriend sleeping with a knee thrown over a blanket we bought last February at a thrift store in Bloomsburg. I went out with a flashlight to the window. The screen was intact. The mulch still showed my footprints from yesterday's leaf raking. Finn followed and sneezed once, his breath frosting. The glass held the smudges our hands always leave when we lift it on warm nights. No obvious signs of a ladder, a scrape, a scuff, nothing. Whoever had stood there had left less trace than the fox that sometimes writes cursive across the yard. Jenna called Eli while I stood under the oak. He swore he hadn't touched the camera. He sounded small and alarmed on speaker, said he didn't even know exactly where we lived. That was true. We'd only met for donuts at the diner and out at the church. Mr. Kreft, the widower who mows the roadside, knew our lane, but he doesn't carry things farther than a rake these days. We made a list while the tea went cold. Every name we wrote down led to a shrug. We turned all the lamps on and watched the window as if it might answer us. At dawn we'd go back to St. Luke's and hunt prints. Dawn came brittle and blue, the kind that makes frost look like sugar. We rolled over gravel in a silence that felt like we'd agreed not to wake the world. At St. Luke's, the field was pale with rime, each blade stiff. I parked where the dirt widened and we walked the edge of the cemetery first, eyes scanning for a clear boot print, a tire mark, anything. The maple where we'd mounted the camera stood with its bark plate armor flaking in thumb-sized chips. I ran my hand along the strap. It was tight, the buckle turned the way I set it, the tail tucked back through twice. My smear of sap was there, dried into a brown puck like an old scab. If someone had unthreaded the strap, they had done it with a locksmith's hands and then reversed every motion exactly. On the ground below, the leaves were a quilt of oak and maple, damp at the edges, curled in the middle. There were marks, but they were the kind the wind makes when it shivers underbrush. No heel, no tread. Beneath the church steps, where the camera had stared for a moment, we found a dead mouse turned to a stiff comma and a gum wrapper folded as neat as origami. Jenna knelt beside the steps and touched a puddle of wax that had skinned over white in the cold. "Kids," she said. "But kids don't carry your camera 3 miles, I said. "Not without leaving a scrawl." We took pictures of nothing and drove to the station anyway. The deputy listened with the same face he uses to tell you a barn's on fire across the ridge. He asked to see the clip twice and then a third time, squinting as if an extra layer would reveal itself if he stared hard enough. "Probably a prank," he said. "You got teens. You got hunters bored out of their skulls. You got a neighbor you don't know as well as you think." He told us to close the curtains. When Jenna told him we didn't own any, he wrote down the name of a hardware store and said he'd swing by St. Luke's tonight just in case. Eli met us at the Historical Society with a second trail cam in a duffel bag and the kind of earnest concern that makes you feel both seen and a little ashamed. We asked to borrow it. He nodded too fast. "I'll catalog the SDs for you," he said, as if labeling would make meaning. That afternoon we hid his camera in the lilac by the bedroom, low and tight, aimed so the frame would catch anyone standing where our window light spilled onto the mulch. We dusted baby powder in a pale ring that the dew wouldn't erase under the sill and tied sewing thread across the hostess at shin height, a tripwire so light it wouldn't snag a moth. I balanced a bottle cap on the outer lip of the sill, a private alarm only we would notice if it fell. Finn watched from the couch, ears swiveling like satellite dishes. We left the church camera where it was, because that felt like the real test. If someone wanted the thrill of ferrying it back and forth, we'd catch them at the house. If not, then something about the church was wrong in a way we didn't have a word for. As the sun sank, Jenna ironed pillowcases she said didn't need ironing, and I found myself counting chairs. It's the kind of useless activity your hands invent when your mind has nothing left to solve. We tried to watch a movie. The dialogue sounded like underwater talk, bubbles and consonants. Midnight came and went like a bird slipping through branches. At 2:11 a.m. tap touched the glass, precise as a metronome. We froze. The second tap came from higher, as if the air itself had nudged the pane. Finn lifted his head, made a sound like a question, and didn't bark. The porch light cut a wedge out of the yard. The thread we tied hung unbroken and silver in that beam. The powder was unmarred, a perfect halo. I opened the back door and stepped out in socks, immediately regretting the cold and the idea. The yard smelled faintly of iron. In the neighbor's field, the stubble made small whisking sounds as the frost shrank. We stayed up until the birds began their small complaints. The cap sat where I'd set it. The thread was still tight enough to sing if you plucked it. We slept for an hour and then started coffee strong enough to balance a spoon. The church first, we decided, then home to check the cards. The buckle at St. Luke's hadn't moved. A spider had anchored a single guy line from the strap to a twig. It would have snapped if anyone had lifted the hardware. It hadn't. I couldn't explain how the same camera had spent part of its night at our window again unless I was willing to call the deputy and introduce him to a ghost. Back home, I loaded both cards while Jenna wrapped her hands around a mug she didn't drink from. The house camera gave us moths fat and luminous, a spider walked like a drummer across the lens, a cat we'd never seen sat with its back to us for 12 minutes and then slipped under the fence. No person. No lamp splash shifting like a shadow. At 3:12 the church camera picked up movement. The frame shook and tilted. A shape moved across the lens, less hand this time than a sleeve, and then the world went black and breathing for a second. When the picture settled, our window filled it again. Same angle, same distance. But not the same night. Jenna's book had slid half an inch closer to the edge. Finn had turned in his sleep and now lay curled instead of long. I didn't need metadata to tell me it wasn't a replay. We let the clip run. For a moment there was nothing but the noise of infrared static and Jenna's soft, even breathing. Then the paper cranes above the dresser stirred. They didn't spin the way they sometimes do when the heat kicks on. They all cocked their paper heads at once, the way birds in a hedge will go still, as if listening to a private signal. I paused the video and scrubbed back. The cranes were static, then slightly turned, then still again. Heat, Jenna said. She sounded like she was practicing a line rather than believing it. We walked into the bedroom and stood beneath them. No draft. Heat off. The window latched. The cap still in place. The powder ring unbroken as a wedding band. Eli came over after lunch with a notebook, 2 pens, and an apology for bringing pens as if pens could possibly help. He watched the clips and then told us a story he'd heard from Mrs. Danner, who keeps the archives. When St. Luke's was new, according to a ledger from 1873, the congregation held a thing called Watch Night every quarter, not just at New Year's. The parishioners would pray through midnight for purity and vigilance. The pastor, a man named Hiram Kozer, would walk the roads with a lantern, stopping at the houses of his flock. He called it, looking on the windows. He wrote sermons about seeing through glass darkly and keeping accounts in the open. After he died, there were rumors he kept walking. People said if you let your curtains hang open he'd stand outside and check whether your household was orderly. Eli tried to laugh as he told it and failed halfway through. It's a story, he said. Folklore becomes a town's way of talking about being nosy. Jenna asked what I was thinking and I told her the truth, that I didn't like the word for what was happening because I didn't have one, and that something about the camera felt less like a person misusing a tool and more like the tool remembering what it was pointed at. A camera doesn't remember. Except ours seemed to have learned our window the way a path learns feet. If a man once walked the roads to make sure the flock was seen, maybe the church had learned to do the walking for him. We took on the work of researching like it was a job. Microfilm, brittle hymnals with names in fountain pen, minutes from meetings where everyone thanked everyone else for the pie. In a column no one would read now, a note, Brother Kozer to resume watchings when his health permits. In another, a quiet scandal, a family admonished for keeping late hours with a visiting salesman. The words had the weight of rules and the softness of small-town harm. I found a map showing the parsonage lane that once ran straight from the church down to the creek and then bent left along a hedgerow that matched our fence line exactly. We were living on a line drawn for a pastor's feet. That night we didn't bother with a movie. We asked our questions out loud like people making bargains. If you have to look, I said, look at me and leave Jenna alone. If you're a person, come when we're awake and leave Prince like a person should. If you're a story, tell it straight. At 3:14 we both woke without knowing why. The room was dim with the glow of the alarm clock. Finn slept through it. In the morning the church camera showed us sleeping as before, but with a difference so small we didn't notice at first. On the far edge of the frame, beyond our window, was a sliver of reflection that wasn't glass. A second frame, silvered and thin, as if another window had leaned over ours like a face finding a face in a mirror. We paused the clip and leaned so close to the screen our noses almost brushed it. The sliver wasn't glare. It had edges, as if another rectangle of glass had been slid up against ours. When I scrubbed a frame forward, thin lines revealed themselves inside that sliver, faint crosshatches like pencil marks. Not a modern grid. Diamonds, slanted and neat, the kind you see in old panes called quarries. Jenna pulled up the folder of scans we'd taken at the Historical Society, a sepia photograph of St. Luke's from 1891, the windows still intact. In the wash of age, the glass looked like fish scales. We tilted the laptop and held the still from the trail cam next to it. The angles matched. Our bedroom window had sprouted a ghost of the churches. We spent the afternoon trying to break the spell with the blunt tools of proof. We taped a white sheet over the inside of the bedroom sash, snug enough to drum when you flicked it. We hung a flashlight in the middle of the room like a low moon so the camera would have something constant to chew on. We set the second trail cam by the lilac again, but this time with a microphone clipped under the sill. We rang the neighbor to say if he saw anyone creeping around our yard tonight, to call, to holler, to do anything but keep quiet. We told ourselves we were drawing a line between folklore and trespass. In my head I kept saying it differently. We were drawing a line between a tool and a habit. At 3:14 we woke the way you do when you hear your name whispered from a different room. The sheet hung smooth, a blank rectangle. The house camera gave us insects and the cat and the thin chirr of the world in winter. The church camera, at 3 hours 14 minutes and 6 seconds, shook once and then found our window. The sheet was not a sheet on that clip. It was two narrow curtains, thin as a sick man's hair, parted down the middle by a pair of invisible hands. The flashlight threw a pale lane down our floor. The paper cranes had turned their beaks to it like gulls watching a wake. My handwriting on a note taped to the inside of the glass, test, was there, backward as it should be. Reality's details were perfect. The one detail we knew wasn't true, the parted cloth, was the one the camera swore by. We looked at the second trail cam's footage for the same moment. Outside, no person. The powder ring we'd poured was untouched. The thread still taut. The tiny cap sat where I'd balanced it as if the night itself had been careful not to breathe too hard. We took the sheet down in the morning. Its tape edges held dust where our fingers had pressed. No hand prints. No smears. If we were being stalked, our stalker had claws made of air. I called the deputy again. He said the words he had, and none of them fit. He asked if we wanted patrol by, and I said yes, and he said fine, and I could hear in the space after fine that he was writing a report titled Domestic Disturbance, Lights. We drove to the church at dusk with 2 folding chairs, a thermos of coffee, and the kind of stubbornness you develop when life refuses to sit where you put it. Eli met us there with a wool cap pulled low and the notebook again, as if some detail we spoke would click into place later, forming a reason we could live with. We set the chairs where the steps start and the maple's shadow would keep us from being silhouettes. The strap on the camera was a dark smile on the bark. The spider's thread still bridged strap to twig. The cemetery stones looked like teeth in the blue of early night. From here, you could see where the lane had once run down to the creek, the long dip between 2 hedges now collapsed into the suggestion of a path. On the far ridge, a farmhouse lit one window like a promise made to no one in particular. The hour between 2 and 3 feels loose, like someone forgot to tie it on. The thermos emptied. Eli told us how Mrs. Danner says her grandmother kept lace curtains and would shake them on a Friday so the pastor wouldn't see dust if he came by on watch night. Whether that had ever been true mattered less than how it sounded when it passed from mouth to mouth. We let ourselves be looked after by being looked at. The phrase made me angry before I knew why. I didn't want a rule in my house that I didn't choose, least of all one that pretended to be care while being inspection. At 3:12 the cold changed. It moved from our noses and ears to the spaces behind our eyes and down the long muscles in our backs. Finn wasn't with us. I mentioned that because it felt like the first mistake we'd made that night. The camera's red sensor LED blinked and then didn't. There was no hand. There was only a feeling as if the tree had leaned closer not to feel the camera but to show it something. On the screen, later, you could see the shift in the histogram the way you see a held breath before a jump. We waited until 3:20, as if the hour's habit would miss its mark if we lingered. Dawn came up from the fields in bands. We checked the strap, the web, the ground. The spider had added a second line during the night, as if hedging its bet. Back home, the house cam was the same old night. The church camera offered us our window again. No sheet. No staged note. Just us from the evening before, asleep, book slid half an inch, Finn stretched at the foot of the bed, breathing slow, a dog being a dog. And there, larger than before, that second frame of glass, as if a window we didn't own had leaned in harder, wanting more of the view. Mr. Kreft stopped on his mower that afternoon at the edge of our yard, the engine ticking as it cooled, his cap held in his lap like a thing that could explain itself if you were polite to it. He said his mother had set a dish of milk in the window on watch night. A token. Not for a cat. For the man walking the road. So he knows you're decent, he said. So he'll keep moving. He looked at our naked window and then up at the cranes and said, without accusation, some folks draw trouble by setting out a sign that they don't believe in it. We cleaned the room as if for inspection, not because we had come around to his view, but because nothing else had worked. We folded the blanket sharp. We set 2 glasses on the sill, mine on the left, Jenna's on the right, water filled to the same line. We lit a candle in a jar and wrote on a card in block letters, "We are accounted for." We taped it eye level. And because I am the one who bargains with empty rooms, I added below it, "Look on me. Leave her alone." We left the lamp on and sat across the hall with the door wide like a mouth. We sat across the hall until the walls took on that underwater blue. The candle flame did not flicker, it leaned, as if a mouth had come close and drawn it sideways. The glasses did not clink, a coin-deep tremor passed through both meniscuses at once and then flattened smooth. Finn let out a sleeping huff, the kind a dog makes when a dream walks by. I said, quiet enough that it felt like breathing and not talking, "We are accounted for." Jenna touched my knee. No footstep, no latch, no scrape of a branch. Only the sense that someone outside a frame had finished their count and written a mark we could not see. We didn't sleep. At first light we checked the house camera and the outside one by the lilac. Moths and frost and the cat. Silence on the mic but for the shiver of winter air. Then the card from the church camera. At 3:14 the shot found our window. The second window in the edge of the frame had widened so that our own glass seemed nested inside it, a smaller rectangle counted by a larger. The curtains we didn't own parted. Our note read clean and centered. "We are accounted for." In that same beat, both water levels fell by the width of a thumbnail. The candle wick jumped sharp and then steadied. A faint oval appeared between the glasses on the sill, as if a third had been there for a moment, then lifted away. In our room the glasses were where we left them, filled to the line. The candle jar wore a crescent of soot on one side, as if a breath had slid past it. On the sill, dry to touch, a ring we hadn't set. I pressed my thumb into that ghost circle and it felt like touching the place an old picture used to hang. Eli, when he saw the clip, paged through minutes until he found the sentence he wanted, a line we had read before without feeling the heat of it, watch night was kept and all were looked upon and accounted. The word accounted lives in the throat like a promise and a threat. We took the trail cam down from the maple. We bought curtains that are heavy enough to hold back a season. We are not superstitious, we say, and we are also people who live where a lane once ran to a church that taught glass to behave like an eye. On quarter nights, we tape a fresh card to the inside pane and set 3 glasses on the sill, one for me, one for Jenna, one for whoever keeps the books. In the morning, nothing obvious changes. The house camera shows nothing but us and the dog. The church has nothing to report. Sometimes at 3:14 the room holds a sheen that isn't ours, and cranes tilt their heads. If you feel watched, you are. Close curtains. Leave a glass too.